Hello and welcome to Business on the Wire. We're counting down to the union budget, always seen as a red letter day. So we reached out to all of you, our viewers, and asked you to write back to us with questions or queries that you may have about what the budget seeks to do this time round. It's the 1st of February, it's a Saturday, just to get that out of the way. But I want to put a few building blocks in place for our conversation before we start taking your questions. Essentially, the budget is a statement of intent. It's a where we stand now and where do we go from here. So ideally, the finance minister should talk about the road tracked so far since her previous budget, what kind of expenditure she's seen, what kind of revenue she's gotten, and of course, more importantly, what her intent is going forward. How she hopes to revive the economy, which sectors and industries she wants to spend a bit more on or a bit less, and what she wants to do for the large population, which is all of us. I do want to dispel one notion though about the union budget being a make or break event. It isn't. That's just a fallacy that's been built by newspaper and media organizations as a PR exercise. The budget is one drop in a very, very big ocean, as you have seen over the last few quarters. We have some very serious problems on our hand, and one union budget document is not going to sort it out. Point number two, is there a silver bullet in place in terms of addressing all these problems? The answer, I'm afraid, is no. Things have gotten extremely complicated and complex. It is going to take some time to dig ourselves out of this, and it doesn't look like a simple solution is possible. I will take much more, of course, through the course of all these questions that you've sent us, and I hope it will address many of the questions and issues there have been on your mind. So let's get straight to it. One question I saw that came up from across categories and across people was what might happen to boost consumption. So I'm just paraphrasing some of what you've written. Do you think the government will cut tax rates, increase slabs, or totally abolish personal taxes? Another point of view which says what can the government do to put more money into the hands of the people? And of course, will there be any incentives to boost consumer demand? I think it's quite clear something will come in through the personal income tax space. There's been enough talk and chatter and stories about it. The form and shape might differ. So either a lot of the additional duties or the additional taxes may be removed to simplify the tax slab. They could actually tweak the tax slab around, particularly at the lowest end of the base, to reduce the overall percentage. Or what they might do is tweak it such that your tax outgo is not more than 10% of your income. So if you pay 1 lakh, you basically pay just 10% tax, and that is the total or the sum total of your outgo. So personal income tax will certainly be addressed. Whether or not she can address consumption indirectly by providing more relief to other spaces remains to be seen. What I want to do though is point out that one big area of trouble has been real estate. There have been some measures through the past few months addressed by the finance ministry seeking to, resolve the problem in real estate, in the real estate sector. I'm not sure how effective it has been. I think it will take a few more months to really see the data, but something might come through in terms of real estate for home buyers, either in terms of relief or some kind of tax credit that you can take back. My caveat to all of this is the simple point that you must remember it's 5% of India's population that pays taxes. So even if we provide some relief to this 5%, we still are dealing with a very, very large majority that neither pays taxes nor stands to get any great improvement or benefit from this entire exercise. So it might be a good option and a good step optically because there's been so much talk about it, but will it affect the larger swath, especially rural India, which has been so badly affected by the economic slowdown? I'm not sure. Point number two, what's happened in the last couple of months is that inflation is the big problem that's come back. So you may have some relief in terms of personal income taxes, but you're spending more. You're spending more on things like food and vegetables and fruits. You're spending more on items like milk, where prices have been increased, and generally everyone is feeling a tighter situation in terms of their spend. So inflation is, I think, the big sort of demon that's rearing its head, and that really is what the finance minister should ideally address when she stands up to speak in February and perhaps puts out a plan on how she plans to deal with it. Let's move to a couple of more questions. There's one that came in on Twitter which said, various reports show that India has to utilize its demographic dividend within 10 years, and for that maximum productive jobs should be created. What change will the budget bring about to reap the benefits? Your question is spot on, and I think the problem is really what should be number one priority in the government's mind right now: how to address the unemployment situation and how to create jobs. There have been, in dribs and drabs, some efforts that have been done. As we can all see, it's not enough. We're ticking at double-digit percentage unemployment across most parts of the country, worse in concentrated spaces like Uttar Pradesh. What could be done perhaps is to go back into some of the existing schemes like the PM Kisan Yojana or the National Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme, to re-examine what could be done in that regard, or even something that has been discussed but never quite seen the light of day, the universal basic income. There is a need to reach out to the lowest in the feeding order and to address the plight and trauma that they are now facing because of this economic distress. So I think addressing employment and skilling, of course, as an extension of that, should be the number one priority. On both, I don't think it's been a great performance for the current government. Unemployment numbers especially. There's another question that has come in from Deb Anuj. He says, what are the changes made in the calculation of GDP recently? Are crucial pointers taken into account or evaded? Debanuj, I think, when you circle back to what the budget is about and what's gone wrong in all these years, you've really drilled it down to the core of the problem. And I think X of everything else, whether or not the finance minister misses on the fiscal deficit target, whether her revenues are not up to the mark, whether there's not enough spending, I think what people are really looking for is, to put it simply, a kind of a cut the crap document. Honesty in what she says and honesty in the numbers. So let's set realistic targets. Let's set realistic targets for what we can accomplish on GST, targets that we have missed quarter on quarter on quarter, and then are giving diktats to the GST officials saying you have to make it to that mark. Realistic targets in terms of what's gone wrong with growth, how bad it looks and which pockets look the worst, and which pockets need the most attention, and of course clear figures on what exactly is happening, both in terms of the revenues that have actually come in and more importantly on what's happened with spend. Can we afford to spend more? That's exactly what we need to do for a country that's in economic distress, but do we have the reserves to do that? So I think for me the banner for this budget would be, please speak honestly, tell the truth, let's be clear, let's just bring it all out and talk about these figures. There were a whole lot of more questions that came in on health and education as categories. Just going by the previous trend, I am not very hopeful of what comes through either on health or education, and I will walk you through why. On health, in fact, or on education first, there have been reports that have indicated that at least on the primary education front, spend is actually going to be slashed by the finance ministry. I know the ministry in concern is fighting it, but it looks like there could be a 3,000 to 4,000 crore cut in the spend. That's what reports indicate. That does affect all your Kendriya Vidyalayas, etc. It does affect your Samagra Shiksha Abhiyan. It looks like the finance ministry is trying to trim costs where it can. Unfortunately, it's coming at the cost of education. I just want to run some of the numbers by you. In the last year, the spend actually did increase over a couple of years to over 56,000. But the thing is, the revised estimates have never gone up. By revised estimates, I mean the finance minister comes back and says, hey, I wanted to spend X amount, but now I spent X plus whatever amount. So they've never actually gone over their budgets. We need more clarity on what got spent in the education vertical and towards which programs specifically. I have a similar problem with health. There is the Ayushman Bharat Yojana, as you know. Many critics and many people who understand this much better than I have pointed out the fact that when you address the scheme for specific hospitals, I beg your pardon, with specific Plimsoll lines in terms of 50 beds, you're actually excluding a big chunk of the hospitals in India, which many a time don't even function with more than 20 beds. So if you want this Yojana to reach out to a lot more people, you have to include the space that you're referring to in this condition. Also remember, most of the hospital care that you get is outpatient. It's not a lot of people who get hospitalized and they're not really getting any relief. So again, I would watch for these specific details in terms of health. What are you doing for the outpatient category and what are you doing to increase the spread of the web of who you're reaching out to when you're putting out these schemes for hospitals and relief? That's education and spend. There were a couple of other macro questions. By macro, I mean, the headline numbers that you will see in the newspapers and business channels. So Pavan Vivek wrote in saying, should the government focus on fiscal policy and public spending? Because clearly the monetary policy and tax cuts for the corporate so far has not yielded desired results to stimulate the economy. You're right, Pavan, and I think it's a double-edged sword for the government right now. Addressing the fisc means that they start spending a bit more. Remember, they have already overshot their fiscal deficit target in the first 8 months. So it doesn't look likely that they're going to hold on to the target. In fact, 3.3% is the fiscal deficit target. It looks like there's going to be some spillover. It also looks like that the glide path that they had set of bringing fiscal deficit levels down, which will actually get pushed back by a couple of years. A lot of people do want them to spend more, but I think the big question is how. Since revenues have not been up to the mark, how does a government that is already struggling to get enough money in start spending more money while also looking over its shoulder at this fiscal deficit target, which has gradually been ballooning higher and bigger through the quarters we've seen. There's one more question that's come in from Vaibhav Khattar. He says that, do you think the economic downturn will start reversing after the third or fourth quarter of 2021? And what do you think the impact would be of the US elections on India economically? They're not strictly related to the budget, but I'll take it anyway. I think that's what everyone is hoping for, to address the first part of your question, that the economic downturn turns at some point within this year. Although, having said that, I would also say by the way things got to in the last quarter of the current year, the expectations got a bit dimmer. It looks like we're going to be stretching this period of low growth, low income for longer than most people estimated. All of us sincerely hope that doesn't happen. Of course, it will be predicated on whether or not we can have some sharp turn in terms of our performance, but it's looking unlikely. And I think that's the best case we can hope for, that by the end of this year, by the second half of this year, we begin to see a little bit of a turnaround. I know there have been some data points that people have referred to saying it looks like it's picking up, but bear in mind, in the last quarter, a lot of companies bump up their orders and bump up their outputs because it's year closing. So I think the better picture will come when we've moved into 2020 a little bit more and we have a sense of what's happening with the corporates. In terms of the US election impact, I'm not sure what might clearly be the impact over there, but I think what we're living and breathing right now is the impact of geopolitical tensions. There looks to be a very, very serious situation in West Asia with Iran. You may have seen what's been happening with crude prices, and that, I think, is the bigger problem for a country like India. We are directly impacted by a spike in crude. It is very, very bad news for us, especially in the situation where our economy is struggling. So $70 plus to a barrel on crude is not good news at all. Let me try and get a couple more questions. There's some questions which relate to what the RBI will do, but frankly in this situation, this is not the RBI's stage and place to perform. They've done what they can in terms of rates. They've also taken the surprising step at that point of not moving with rates, a clear indication of the fact that even the Reserve Bank is very concerned about inflation and where it goes. But I think they'll be watching for some of the details, as all of us will be, what's happening with the revenue intake the government has seen, how hopeful is it of spending more, which categories does it want to spend on, and is there honesty really in terms of what the fiscal deficit target is and the growth target is as well. You will see some advanced estimates coming out in the course of these days, and I think that might set the tone and tenor of what to expect. So I hope that's answered some of your questions around the union budget.
To receive instant updates on all videos from The Wire, click the subscribe button and hit the bell icon. Pay to support independent journalism. Click the link in the description and choose the amount you want to pay.